Welcome to NTD News Today. I'm Chris Beers. Here are today's top stories. Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro now held in a Brooklyn jail after being captured by the U.S. just a day ago. Details on President Trump's plan for next steps. Venezuelans are celebrating after the U.S. captured Maduro, taking him out of the country. But Venezuela's Supreme Court is already trying to put another socialist figure into power. France and the UK bombing a suspected ISIS weapons facility in Syria. Details on the operation. North Korea launches ballistic missiles just ahead of a key summit between South Korea and China. Analysts say the move sends a message to Beijing about regional tensions. A deadly fire at a Swiss bar. Prosecutors open a criminal probe after 40 people are killed and more than 100 injured. Many of the victims were young as investigators work to determine what went wrong. Joint pain, especially in the knees, is a leading reason why people seek medical care in the U.S. Vital Signs' Brendan Fallon shares insights from the former team physician to the Philadelphia 76ers on preventing easing arthritis pain.
This is NTD News Today, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Venezuela's toppled leader Nicolás Maduro is now held in a Brooklyn jail on Sunday, awaiting drug charges. That's after he and his wife had been taken by U.S. Special Forces on Saturday. The Brooklyn jail also held other high-profile inmates, such as Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell and FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried. Here's a clip of Nicolás Maduro being escorted through the Drug Enforcement Administration office, being taken to the Drug Administration office. Maduro is expected to make an initial appearance in Manhattan federal court on Monday. The Justice Department has charged Maduro and his wife with drug trafficking. President Trump said Saturday that the U.S. is ready to stage a second attack if necessary.
We are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. So we were prepared to do a second wave if we needed to do so.
Trump said the U.S. will run Venezuela until there's a safe transition and that Maduro's vice president would lead the nation for now instead of the opposition leader, whom Trump said lacked the respect to govern Venezuela. As for Venezuela's vice president, U.S. officials say they reserve the right to take military action if she doesn't respect U.S. interests. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said there's a quarantine around Venezuela to prevent sanctioned oil tankers going in and out of the country so that the U.S. could exert leverage over what happens next.
We don't need Venezuela's oil. We have plenty of oil in the United States. What we're not going to allow is for the oil industry in Venezuela to be controlled by adversaries of the United States.
Meanwhile, the U.S. has allowed airlines to resume flights in the Caribbean. U.S. airlines canceled flights to destinations like Puerto Rico and St. Lucia Saturday following U.S. operations to seize Maduro. After the fall of socialist leader Nicolás Maduro, Venezuela's Supreme Court is already trying to put another socialist figure into power. Meanwhile, Venezuelan refugees are celebrating an end to autocratic rule after yesterday's military operation. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has more.
Venezuelans are celebrating after the U.S. captured socialist leader Nicolás Maduro, but the country's Supreme Court is already appointing another socialist figure as the interim president.
It is hereby ordered that Delcy Eloína Rodriguez Gómez, Executive Vice President of the Republic, assume and exercise all the powers, duties, and authorities inherent to the office of the president.
The former vice president used to actively support the so-called socialist revolution of late Hugo Chavez. It's not clear yet how this will play out, as President Trump on Saturday said the U.S. would now, quote, run Venezuela. Besides capturing Maduro, the U.S. also hit various military bases in Venezuela. Footage shows the aftermath of the strikes on Sunday. The plan to capture the socialist leader had been in the works for months and included detailed rehearsals. Elite U.S. troops reportedly created an exact replica of Maduro's safe house. They practiced how they would enter the strongly fortified residence to make sure the operation wouldn't fail. Venezuelan refugees in Colombia are now celebrating the fall of the socialist regime.
We are celebrating, seeing Maduro behind bars, taken to the United States because of all the damage that man did.
It's really something we've been fighting for a long time, an experience that has truly been unforgettable today.
Heads of state from across the globe are weighing in as well.
I want to express the entire government's support for the determined decision and action of the United States to restore freedom and justice to that part of the world as well.
After hearing the US captured Maduro, Argentine President Javier Milei said, quote, "Today's news is excellent news for the free world." Some countries are opting not to take a direct stance, neither for the US nor for Venezuela. Canada, Germany, France, Paraguay and others are instead calling for democracy to prevail, with some saying international law must be respected. And a few countries like China, North Korea, Russia and others are directly siding with socialist Nicolás Maduro. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Joining me now to discuss is Senior Fellow at the Center for Security Policy, Grant Newsham. Thank you so much for joining us, Grant. Maduro is here in New York City as we speak. He's expected to be arraigned in short order. What is your reaction to his apprehension by U.S. forces on Saturday?
Well, it was quite an impressive operation to grab him, and I think it was a good thing that he was removed. The real question now, of course, is what happens, because he's got a lot of cronies. He's got a very sort of vicious secret police, largely with a lot of Cuban involvement in there as well, but it's committed at least 19,000 murders during the course of the last 25 years. So what if they just hunker down? I hope the American planners have thought of this. But also you notice that a lot of the explanation, justification is based on, you hear oil mentioned a lot, but what you really need to pay attention to is how Venezuela was being used as a platform by the Chinese, the Russians, the Cubans, the Iranians, both to launch drug warfare against the United States, gang warfare as well. The Venezuelans, of course, sent up their best gangs for that, but also to put in place a military presence that potentially threatens the United States and its key infrastructure as well. So that alone was reason to go after Maduro, to bring back a consensual, legitimate government. There it already exists. It was elected in 2024. So you couldn't allow this to continue happening under America's noses. And the Chinese were glad to have us just lying around doing nothing. This has put them on the back foot a bit.
Yeah, and to your point, Republican Congressman Carlos Jimenez calls this a Berlin Wall type of moment. That's a pretty big comparison. Do you agree?
It's pretty close to it. As you notice how sort of the free world, the civilized world, had just sat around and done nothing, while Chavez and then Maduro turned Venezuela from a democracy, from a sort of free market society into a police state. And the reason they do that is because they could get away with it. And there's too many cases of that around the world, historically and certainly now. So finally, somebody actually stood up and said, look, enough's enough. And that last election they held in Venezuela, that was the cheating, the fraud was so immense that the Venezuelan regime didn't even try to hide it. And over 70% of Venezuelans wanted somebody different. And now they just might have a chance to get it, but there is a lot of work to be done.
So talk a bit about that work. I mean, Venezuela's Supreme Court just made Maduro's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, the interim president. How does this play out with President Trump saying the U.S. will run Venezuela?
Well, I'm hoping that Mr. Trump's commentary was the sort of language that you hear in a press conference where you don't get into the details. But I do hope that the U.S. government, the military, State Department, etc., all carefully plan for what is going to come after this, because you may have taken Maduro out, but you have still got this repressive police state in place. And maybe it will collapse. Maybe the military parts of the security services have been worked on by, say, the U.S. intelligence agencies so that they will give up. But it remains to be seen. It was a very impressive operation today, but in some ways that was maybe the easy part, compared to what's coming, because there is, as I said, this regime in place, And what if they just hunker down and say, we're not going anywhere? I hope this has been thought through.
Sure, and President Trump did say they were set up to conduct a second assault if needed, and perhaps they're still set up in that position. I mean, they're saying that U.S. forces will remain in that area. A massive, something like 25% of the U.S. fleet is there. So, what would that presence mean, and that potential threat mean to any, remnants of the Maduro regime?
Well, there's a lot of force we've got in the region, and you can see how it can be used very effectively against key targets. But there is a limit to how much you can bomb a country into doing what you want them to do. And said the good intelligence works, the persuasion that you should have been done earlier. Hopefully it has been done. Give some of these key figures in the regime a chance. You either, you can go somewhere else and live on the beach somewhere, or your future is not going to be happy. It's your choice. But if it's just a question of bombing a country until it gives up, that's hard to do. So there's hopefully a lot of work that has been done elsewhere beforehand.
And Grant, staying with the operation that actually extracted Maduro, as a Marine Corps veteran, how would you rate the precision strike that led to his arrest?
Oh, on a scale of about 1 to 100, I'd give it about a 200. It was incredibly impressive. And everyone involved in that deserves a lot of commendation. Additionally, they were able to keep it secret, which was even more impressive. And one notes how effectively they slipped through the Russian and the Chinese air defenses in Venezuela. So militarily, the U.S. can do all sorts of things, but when you do deal with a country like Venezuela, force isn't the only thing that you can use, and particularly it's a big place, and it's going to take some sort of political efforts, political warfare as it is, to change things. And one of the advantages, though, is you do have a legitimate government in place. And the idea is that, well, they're going to come in and take over. And there's all sorts, of course, of economic pressure that you can put on Venezuela, so that the Chinese can't keep propping them up. The Cubans are hit by the cutoff of oil to them. The Iranians, they have a very hard time as well, and the Russians as well. You'll notice that these countries that said they were going to support Venezuela, the Chinese, the Russians, well, they haven't done anything of the kind. So there's still things that we can do in addition to a potential military threat. But ultimately, it's those key pillars of the regime, particularly the coercive parts of it, the secret police, the interior ministry, the counterintelligence services. Most of those people would rather stay alive and maybe have a decent life somewhere else, but you have got to apply pressure on them and also support the Venezuelans that want consensual government and that have suffered trying to bring this about, the ones who still remain in Venezuela and the ones overseas. So this is a sort of a complex operation that they've got going now with Venezuela, and it remains to be seen how it will turn out. But it was a good day yesterday. I think, as Gordon Chang said, yesterday was Venezuela's 4th of July, because what has happened to Venezuela over the last 25 years has been a tragedy. And the free world has just stood by, wringing its hands with eyes primly averted. Well, you had thugs take over the place, turn it into a narco state, drive out many of the decent peoples, export too many of their bad people to the United States, cooperate with regional drug traffickers and other governments to pump drugs into the United States, giving the Chinese communists, who say they're going to kill us, giving them a platform from which to operate, allowing Cuba to continue, letting the Iranians get in and put in drone factories and missile platforms as well. And the Russians as well have been doing all sorts of things down there. You couldn't allow that to continue. So finally, somebody did something more than just wringing their hands.
So, Grant, you're enumerating the legacy of Chavez and Maduro. What does the end of the Maduro regime, hopefully, ultimately, mean for the Venezuelan people?
Well, it will give them a chance to have a consensual government, to have a free market, a place where it's not run by thugs and their cronies who all benefit and drive everyone else out of the country or to live in poverty. This has been too often, has been allowed to happen around the world because these guys can get away with it. And one remembers Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. If he had been removed early on after he had killed 20,000 Matabele tribesmen in 1982, well, that country would have avoided a lot of horror. But you've seen too many of those sorts of things happen. And these sorts of regimes, it's good to finally see somebody sort of put them on short notice and then do something about it. But it gives the people who want honest government, who want a decent, fair society, it gives them some oxygen. Otherwise, they just get strangled by the secret police and run by the Cubans and Venezuelan thugs. So that is what we're seeing at stake here, seeing happen here really is the idea of supporting freedom and not just standing by with eyes primly averted while a democratic, free country, has freedom snuffed out. This
it
is
really
something
is
that we see too much of.
Such an important moment for the Venezuelan people. We have about 30 seconds here, Grant. Maduro met with Chinese officials in Venezuela hours before his arrest. You mentioned Venezuela's friends. The two nations have supposedly been close allies, but that didn't pay off ultimately for Maduro. What message does this send to other Chinese allies?
Well, they ought to pay close attention to it, particularly unless they're right next door to China. It's a long way away, and you saw that China couldn't do anything to save them. These guys do have a pretty good sense of their own mortality and how to stay alive. And if it's relying on the PRC to come and help you, well, maybe that isn't the best bet to make.
All right, Senior Fellow at the Center for Security Policy, Grant Newsham, thank you. It's always great to see you.
Well, thanks very much.
France and the UK bombed a suspected underground arms cache previously used by ISIS in Syria. That's according to the British Defense Ministry. Here's a video of Royal Air Force Typhoon aircraft refueling midair during the joint strike. In a post on X, the British Defense Secretary said the action shows the UK's determination to stand with allies to stamp out any resurgence of Daesh, another name for ISIS. Britain said the area was devoid of any civilian habitation before the attack and that all its aircraft had returned safely. Coming up, North Korea launches ballistic missiles just ahead of a key summit between South Korea and China. Analysts say the move sends a message to Beijing about regional tensions, and our guest explains the significance of the North Korean missile launch and the U.S. apprehension of Nicolás Maduro. That's right here on NTD News Today. Stay tuned. Welcome back. North Korea fired at least 2 ballistic missiles on Sunday, just hours before the South Korean president's visit to China. The launch marks the country's first missile tests in 2 months and have drawn sharp criticism from both South Korea and Japan. Here's Japan's defense minister on the threat.
Such ballistic missile launches violate relevant UN Security Council resolutions and constitute a serious issue concerning the safety of our citizens. Japan has lodged a stern protest and strongly condemned North Korea's missile launch through the embassy route in Beijing. The Ministry of Defense will continue to work closely with the United States, South Korea, and other parties to protect the lives and property of our people by dedicating all efforts to information gathering, analysis, and vigilance.
The missiles were fired into the sea between the Koreas and Japan, flying 550 miles, according to South Korea and Japan. Analysts say the launch may have been a message to China, signaling opposition to closer ties with South Korea and its denuclearization stance. South Korea held an emergency meeting and called on North Korea to stop provocative acts that violate United Nations resolutions. In recent weeks, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has visited weapons factories, overseen missile tests, and toured a nuclear-powered submarine. These actions come ahead of the country's 9th Party Congress, which will outline major policy goals. South Korea hopes China will help promote peace on the Korean peninsula during President Lee's meeting with Xi Jinping. Joining me to discuss this and the U.S. strike on Venezuela is geopolitical analyst and senior national security editor of the National Interest, Brandon Weichert. Welcome back to the show, sir. What do you make of the timing of the ballistic missile launch by North Korea here?
Well, you're right to point out this upcoming visit by the South Korean leadership to China, but I actually think this is probably more in connection to the Venezuela strike. I think Kim Jong-un is reminding President Trump that unlike Maduro's regime in Venezuela, North Korea has a wider range of weapons that could seriously complicate any U.S. military efforts to remove Kim Jong-un from power. Yes, they're also upset about this meeting between China and South Korea, and they're also concerned about the coming People's Congress. But really, they're letting everybody know we will not go down the way Maduro did.
Okay, and I want to look into this a little bit more before we follow the Maduro path. North Korea's state media reported that Kim Jong-un Saturday called for more than doubling tactical guided weapons productions. How concerned should the U.S. be about that?
Well, this is par for the course, if you will. You'll remember after we invaded Iraq in 2003 and took out Saddam, the North Koreans went on a binge over many years of building up their systems. They are very worried, and then of course after Libya we took out Gaddafi. The regime there is very worried that the same fate will befall them, so they're going to do whatever they can to basically make themselves a porcupine. And I think it's working because I don't think anybody is very intent on taking out Kim Jong-un's regime, if only because of the blowback, of what could happen with all of these weapons. Either they'd be launched at our forces, or even more scary over time, they would be, leached into the global arms market, the black market, and could end up in the hands of terrorists. So I don't think Kim Jong-un has to worry. I don't think Trump is too keen on taking him out because of the nuclear arsenal.
Okay, and turning to Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro is currently being held right here, right now in New York City, awaiting his arraignment on charges of narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and more. What is your reaction to his historic arrest?
Well, I think it's a long time coming. Look, you're not going to get me to shed any tears over any regime member falling in Caracas. As you know, I live in Florida, so Venezuela, Cuba, these are countries that are somewhat near and dear to our hearts down here in the great Sunshine State. I would just caution people and remind everybody, because I see on Twitter, everybody's really, oh, we're getting the oil. Well, maybe one day, but I think it's important to note this was a tactical raid. And it was very successful, very much like the bin Laden raid was successful in 2011. We got our target. We didn't really have any casualties, thank God, and we got out. I think what this strike really showcased was the inefficiency. Grant was talking in your previous segment about the unwillingness of China to have the backs of their allies like Venezuela. It also shows the weakness of Chinese military technology. I have been told by multiple sources that the Chinese-made early warning radar system that Venezuela purchased and was very proud of having around Caracas was completely suppressed by our growlers that were launched to suppress all electronic technology and communications and detection gear. So there's a big problem right now with Chinese military gear not being as good as the Chinese are advertising, which will have downstream impacts on the Chinese ability to defend themselves as well as their allies closer to home.
And I want to ask you something that I just asked our earlier guest, Grant Newsham, about. Maduro met with Chinese officials just a few hours before he was taken out of Venezuela. They're supposed to be good friends, but China, at the end of the day, it didn't work out for Maduro, that relationship. So what message does that send to other Chinese allies?
Well, I think the key thing to remember is China's key point of contact always is geoeconomics, first and foremost. So trade, aid, if you will, economic assistance, those sorts of things are always the first window into dealing with China for these regimes. Yes, China did sell them weapons and radar technology, but really the key for China was access to the oil, access to the rare earth minerals, propping up the regime financially. It wasn't really a military alliance in the way, say, a NATO alliance is a military alliance. If NATO is attacked, everybody knows we are likely going to go to war on behalf of NATO. That is not the case for China and its allies. It is primarily economic, and it's more of a vassal relationship, meaning, Venezuela was basically paying tribute to China to prop up the regime in Caracas, rather than really being a mutually beneficial defensive alliance. The one that interests me is the fact that the Russians, who very much are a more traditional military ally to Venezuela, did not intervene. And that's where things get interesting, because I'm hearing from people, and this is unconfirmed, so take from this what you will, that Putin might have been told by Trump that the plan was they were going to get Maduro at night out of Caracas, And Putin might have looked the other way because he thinks he's going to use that as leverage to get a better deal with Trump on Ukraine. And so that might be the reason why the Russians did not militarily do more at the end of the day to protect Maduro and the regime.
So, Brandon, how big of a setback is this for Chinese and Russian interests in South America?
Well, the Chinese still have a lot of connectivity to South America. They still hold the Panama Canal Zone. They manage it, the major locks there, and they're building these bridges over the Panama Canal Zone. They still have access to Cuba. So it's a setback, but it's not a death blow. And I would remind everybody, the regime in Venezuela still exists. It's still there. Delcy Rodriguez is now the leader, and she in many ways is worse than Maduro because she's more competent than Maduro was just a gangster. He was just a thug. Delcy and Cabello and Padrino Lopez, the defense minister, these people are very keen and they're very, very competent technocrats and they're believers in the ideology. So it could be that the regime in Venezuela continues on and actually intensifies its alliance with Russia and China and Iran. We don't know the outcome of that yet because Trump didn't knock out the whole regime. Obviously, he doesn't want to, but it is a setback. And if we can leverage that and actually use that as momentum to get the Chinese out of the Panama Canal Zone, boy, that would be a big win for America in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, so it sounds like both you and Grant Newsham are saying that this might not actually be the end of the Maduro regime, of the socialist regime.
No,
in
it's just the
Venezuela.
beginning. It's just the beginning. The regime continues to exist. It sounds like the president, Trump, is not going to do more to promote democracy or do more to bring in a more democratic leadership. It sounds like he wants to keep the players in place and just basically use them as puppets. But the question is, will the puppets play along? And I don't think right now they are. And I think actually Trump shot himself in the foot when he threw Delcy Rodriguez under the bus in the press conference yesterday. I think she would have gone along, but then he humiliated her by saying that, she's going to do what I want. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And now she's, not going to do what he wants, which is going to actually create a bigger military crisis because the Venezuelans are not going to go quietly into that good night.
All right, Brennan, let's look at some of the criticism of Trump's move yesterday. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he's concerned international law has not been respected. He's joined by China, Russia, and Brazil, and some U.S. politicians. How do you view this critique?
I think international law is a construct, artificial construct that was created to paper over the fact that we live in an anarchic international system and might often does make right. And unfortunately, right now, the big boys, that's America, that's Russia, that's China, that's Israel in the Middle East, we're going to do what we need to do. And the rest of the world is going to have to deal with it. We see this with Russia and Ukraine. God willing, we won't see it with, China and Taiwan, but that very well could happen sooner than later. And you're seeing it now with America and Venezuela. I want to make it clear. The international order as we understood it is gone. Gutierrez and the UN, these are just holdovers from a bygone age. The real international order is being created right now, and it is a predominantly tripolar fluid system consisting of the US, China, and Russia, with some other powers coming up behind us. And there's going to be a new sense of international law and order being birthed in response to this.
That is pretty interesting. Can you expand on that, Brandon, before we wrap up here?
Yeah, basically, we've seen this really since 2003, the invasion of Iraq, right? The invasion of Iraq was completely not what we would have expected the international order to allow for, and yet the Americans did it. We did what we wanted to do, and that shattered any semblance of international norm. And from that moment on, you saw Russia becoming belligerent with its neighbors. You saw China becoming increasingly belligerent with its neighbors. You now see Israel having to defend itself more vociferously because of the instability in the Middle East. So my argument is in 2003 and then 2008, the Great Recession, the American-led post-Cold War order of a unipolar power rising above all the rest, that is done. America will continue to be a superpower, but there are now at least two other military and economic powers coming online behind us, and that is China and Russia, and it's an entirely new world as a result, and we're not going back to the way it was in the 1990s and early 2000s.
And it will be interesting to see how the arrest of Nicolás Maduro from Venezuela plays out in that new world. Geopolitical analyst Brandon Weichert, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Coming up, a deadly fire at a Swiss bar. Prosecutors open a criminal probe after 40 people are killed and more than 100 injured. Many of the victims were young. Investigators are now working to determine what went wrong. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Swiss prosecutors have opened a criminal investigation into the managers of a bar where a deadly fire killed 40 people and injured more than 100 others. Authorities say the couple who ran the venue are suspected of negligence. It comes as investigators work to determine what caused the blaze. Here's what the lead prosecutor had to say yesterday regarding the investigation.
A criminal investigation was opened against the two managers. This criminal investigation will allow, in collaboration with all the parties concerned, for all leads to be highlighted and explored. I have already said, and I repeat, no lead is being abandoned. We have opened an investigation for involuntary homicide, involuntary bodily injury, and involuntary arson.
The two managers of La Constellation, identified by French media as Jacques and Jessica Moretti, are facing criminal investigations. Authorities suspect that handheld fireworks attached to champagne bottles are likely the cause of the fire. 8 victims, all Swiss nationals between the ages of 16 and 24, were identified Saturday. Many of those killed or missing are teenagers. Here's what some of the local residents are saying.
One needs a moment to gather oneself, to pray, to come up for air, so to speak. But afterwards, I would like an independent investigation. An independent investigation to know who failed. Because when you look at the videos, you see that it catches fire immediately. That's not normal. If everything had been up to standards, in my view, even if someone lit a lighter, it shouldn't be able to burn.
Yes, we need to see what happened and why, but as I just said, we need to be 100% sure that this is the case. We must not speculate with, we think that. No, we need to be sure that this and that happened. And it remains a serious accident. And an accident is always the result of several things that went wrong together.
La Constellation is a popular spot for younger crowds in the ski resort town. Outside the bar, flowers, stuffed animals, and messages of love are seen at the police barriers. We hear from one of the survivors of this harrowing ordeal and a local.
Miraculously, I managed to get out. I think it was, I don't even know how to explain it. I managed to get out. I don't even know how to explain it. I was there where it started, in the basement. I was in the basement, right in the middle of it, and I had to really grab a table. I had my friend in my arms. She slipped. Unfortunately, today she has gone missing.
24/7. We're haunted by this tragedy. It's going to last a long time. For the ski station, it's not going to end soon. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a good thing. It's difficult. It's difficult to forget things. Tragedies like this, we can't forget. It's impossible.
Families have been gathering at a nearby conference center where Swiss authorities are working with Italy's civil protection team and the Italian ambassador. Officials say the identification process is expected to be complete later this afternoon. Next, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani signing an executive order undoing all of former Mayor Eric Adams' orders issued after his indictment in 2024. Here's more.
Although Mamdani's office did not list the specific orders to be revoked, among them would be former Mayor Eric Adams' directive that barred mayoral appointees from discriminating against Israel and Israeli citizens. Adams said the action not only tackled anti-Semitism, but adopted a definition of anti-Semitism. The order does not, however, remove Adams' newly created office to combat anti-Semitism, which Mamdani said he would retain. In addition, Adams' order that directed police to regulate protests near houses of worship to safeguard free speech would also be undone.
Coming up, joint pain, especially in the knees, is a leading reason why people seek medical care in the U.S. Vital Signs' Brendan Fallon shares insights from Dr. Nick DeNubli, former team physician to the Philadelphia 76ers, on preventing and easing arthritis pain. Stay tuned. Welcome back to NTD. Vital Signs' Brendan Fallon now with tips from a leading orthopedic surgeon on preventing and relieving arthritis.
Hello, welcome to Vital Signs. If you're dealing with joint pain, particularly knee pain, if you have arthritis, then I have some tips from one of America's leading orthopedic surgeons. This man was the orthopedic consultant and team physician for the Philadelphia 76ers and also Pennsylvania Ballet. His name is Dr. Nicolás Maduro. And so he was really dealing with athletes at the top level of competition and had at his disposal the best resources and has tremendous insight on dealing with arthritis, particularly as it relates to knee problems. I asked him about what can be done because I've had my own issues with knee. I broke my right knee when I was about 14, had the left meniscus, medial meniscus removed from that knee. So I have a personal reason for wanting to ask him about what can be done, everything from supplements to surgery to deal with knee pain and potentially arthritis. On the supplement front, this is the first thing that he had to say.
I'm a big believer in joint supplements. I think the data is pretty good on glucosamine and chondroitin if you use a high quality brand, and that's tricky in the supplement world because there's no regulation. But you want a high quality brand of glucosamine and chondroitin. It helps some people with arthritis. There's other supplements.
These come together?
Turmeric. They usually do. Most of you'll find the better brands that are sold out there, and I can mention the great brand that has some additional things, boswellia in it, green tea extract, and an avocado soy compound. These are all what we call chondroprotective. That can protect and maybe, you know, I don't think it's going to regrow any cushions. You know, anybody that tells you you're going to take something in your mouth and you're regrowing joint, or that they're going to inject something, even stem cells, and regrow, not yet. We're not there yet. But it can protect and stabilize the situation. So things like
it can stop further deterioration.
Slow down the deterioration, I think, is a better way to say it. I don't know if you can stop it. Turmeric is also good. And, you know, we now have certain injectables. You know, we're using PRP, which is your own body's platelets and the growth factors from there, stem cells into the knees, all can stabilize the articular cartilage, which is the cushion in the joint. That's what wears down when you have arthritis, your cushion.
So Dr. Maduro talking about stem cell related therapies like PRP as a way to deal with knee issues or arthritis in general. In a moment, I'll play a clip where he's talking about a really advanced treatment, more advanced than what was available to me when I had my knee surgery some 30 years ago, that actually involves regrowing cartilage cells. I'll play that in a minute, but first, some general advice he had was to keep your weight down if you're dealing with arthritis in the knees, because he said every pound that you weigh equates to 5 pounds load on the knee. So if you lose 5 pounds, it's kind of like taking a 25-pound load off your knees. So very much in the interest of people dealing with knee problems to keep their weight down. Okay, now I'll play that clip where he's talking about this therapy that actually involves taking cartilage cells from your remaining cartilage, as the case may be, and regrowing them in a lab to later implant them. Here that clip is. You mentioned a type of surgery where if it's caught early enough, they can regrow certain, or take a sample and grow these cells. And how available is that if someone is watching this and they're experiencing?
Very available. It used to be and I was one of the first in the country to do
this. Sorry, what is that called again?
Nowadays it's called MACI, and it's Carticel is what you would look up and you would learn about it. But MACI, you know, when it first came out, most surgeons tried one and thought, oh my God, this is so hard, because it was a big open surgery and the cells were liquid, so you put them in and they would drip out, so you had to do another surgery on the body to get a little, the covering of the bone is called the periosteum, so you would take a piece of periosteum, it's like tissue paper, and you'd have to dissect that off and then put that over the patch to hold the fluid in and sew around there with this little fine suture that you'd be blind. So it was very, now it's done through a minimal incision because the scaffolds came on. So the biologic scaffolds where you can grow the cells on a scaffold and just almost inlay a little piece like a postage stamp in there and use your body's own fibrin glue to seal it.
I'm just glad that it's surgeons with far more precision than I have who are doing these kinds of procedures. Shortly, I'll play a clip with Dr. Maduro talking about his #1 sporting passion, which is also related to knee health and living a long life. But first, if you want to see this full interview, which could be published at the time that you're seeing this, just go to ept.ms/save your knee. That's if the video is already up. If not, just go to ept.ms/vital signs to see the full array of interviews that I've been doing. Now, Dr. Danubli talks about the sport that he's found to be, according to research, the most related to living a long life, and the one that he is most passionate and currently plays regularly. Here he is.
Two very large population-based studies, two of them showed this, was that the active people lived longer than sedentary. We knew that. But amongst the active people, only one group broke out. Racket sports, tennis. They lived 9 years longer than the healthiest active people out there.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. Everybody was amazed, but I'm someone who learned tennis later in life. You know, I taught myself in med school, and I got pretty good, but then as my practice got busy and I had other interests, I gave it up for a long time. And it wasn't until I was later in life that I decided to take it up again because my kids were getting interested. I really had no interest, but I got kind of lured back onto the court, and I really reluctantly, and I started playing again. And I learned a lot of how it changed my life again. And what I think tennis does for you is, obviously it's exercise. So you're getting both aerobic and anaerobic. You're getting cardiovascular health from it because you're moving a lot, both sprint and sometimes distance. So tennis players are the fittest athletes out there. I mean, they're amazing.
Once again, to see that full Vital Signs interview with Dr. Danubli, just go to your web browser and enter ept.ms/save-your-knee. That is all for today's news. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay with us for the NTD Evening News at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific.